A former mercenary, now a homeless man, tries to escape his violent past until a ruthless gang targets him, mistaking him for an easy prey. But when they strike, they awaken something deadly. Now the hunter has become the hunted, and the real war is just beginning. Gabriel pulled his tattered coat tighter around his body as the cold wind howled through the desolate streets. The city was a graveyard of forgotten souls, its alleys soaked in shadows and filth. He walked with slow, deliberate steps, his unshaven face hidden beneath the hood of his coat. To the world, he was just another homeless man, another piece of the city's decay. But not to Raoul. From the mouth of a dark alley, Raoul watched the lone figure move through the dimly lit streets. His lips curled into a smirk. "That one," he muttered, nudging one of his men. "Easy prey." His gang of 4 chuckled in agreement. To them, Gabriel was nothing more than a beggar, a man who had long been beaten down by life. They saw the worn-out shoes, the sluggish gait, the eyes that never lifted from the ground. They saw weakness. "You sure he's worth it?" one of the men asked, adjusting the grip on his switchblade. Raoul scoffed. "Of course, every street rat has something. Money, a trinket, a warm coat. And if not, well, we have fun either way." The gang melted into the shadows, trailing Gabriel as he turned down an empty street. The city itself seemed a whisper of its dangers. Broken streetlights flickered weakly, graffiti-covered walls bore silent witness to past crimes, and the distant sound of a siren wailed through the night. Gabriel felt the eyes on him. He always did. Even after all these years, his instincts had not dulled. He had spent too long in the darkness, had become too familiar with the weight of an unseen threat. He exhaled slowly, keeping his posture slouched, his movements unassuming. Not yet. He reached the entrance of an abandoned lot and paused beneath a crumbling street lamp. He could hear them now, soft footsteps, barely audible, but careless enough to confirm their presence. He ran a hand through his messy hair, feigning exhaustion as he leaned against the wall. Raoul and his men lurked in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. "He's alone," whispered one of them. "This is too easy." "Tomorrow we split whatever he's got," Raoul murmured. "Tonight we teach him not to walk these streets." The gang leader's grin widened as he adjusted the grip on his brass knuckles. He could already hear the dull thud of his fist striking flesh, the weak groans of the defenseless man crumbling beneath him. He had done this 100 times before. Some men fought back, others begged, but in the end, they all bled the same. Gabriel shifted slightly, listening. He had already mapped out the positions of his pursuers. 2 behind him, 1 lingering to the side, and Raoul standing back, waiting to enjoy the show. It had been a long time since he had been hunted. His fingers twitched as the familiar pulse of anticipation ran through his body. A beast long buried stirred within him, but he forced it down. Not yet. He had spent years trying to leave that life behind. But some things never really leave. Raoul took a step forward, rolling his shoulders. "Hey, old man," he called, his voice dripping with amusement. "Rough night?" Gabriel turned slightly, his face still hidden beneath the shadows of his hood. He didn't answer. Raoul chuckled, his gang spreading out. "Don't worry, it'll be over soon." Gabriel exhaled, steadying himself. He could feel the moment coming, the shift in the air, the silent agreement among the attackers. They were going to strike, and they had no idea what they were about to awaken. The air in the alley thickened with anticipation. Raoul cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing against the brick walls. His men circled Gabriel, confidence in their steps, their weapons glinting under the dim light. They saw an old, frail man, a vagrant who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. They had no idea. Gabriel kept his shoulders hunched, his head slightly bowed. He counted their breaths, their shifting weight, the tension in their muscles as they prepared to lunge. His hands itched to move, but he held back just a second longer. One of the men made the first mistake. A young thug with a jagged knife rushed forward, aiming for Gabriel's ribs. The blade cut through the air, swift, deadly, until Gabriel twisted, stepping inside the attack with eerie precision. His hand shot up, seizing the man's wrist. A sickening crack. A scream tore through the alley as the attacker's arm bent the wrong way. The knife clattered to the ground. Gabriel didn't stop. He pivoted, using the momentum to drive an elbow into the man's throat. The thug collapsed, choking. For a fraction of a second, the others hesitated. The sight of their friend gasping on the ground shattered the illusion of an easy target. Raul's eyes narrowed. "Kill him!" The second attacker charged. Gabriel ducked beneath a wild punch and drove his knee into the man's gut. As the thug doubled over, Gabriel grabbed the back of his head and smashed it against the alley wall. Blood splattered onto the bricks, and the body crumpled to the floor. The remaining two thugs moved together now, their previous arrogance gone. One swung a metal pipe, the other wielded a switchblade. Gabriel dodged the pipe's arc, the wind of the swing brushing past his face. The moment the attacker overextended, Gabriel struck. His palm slammed into the man's chin, snapping his head back. With a swift motion, he grabbed the pipe midair and drove the end of it into the thug's stomach. The man gagged, his knees buckling. The one with the knife hesitated, his grip tightening on the handle. "Come on," Gabriel rasped, his voice a whisper of something dangerous. The thug lunged, the blade aiming for Gabriel's throat. Too slow. Gabriel sidestepped, caught the man's wrist, and twisted hard. The knife dropped. Gabriel snatched it mid-fall, spun it in his hand, and drove it into the thug's chest. The man's eyes widened, his mouth opening in a silent scream before he collapsed. Only Raul remained. Blood stained the alley. The stench of iron filled the air. The flickering street lamp above them cast long, distorted shadows over the motionless bodies. Raul took a step back, then another. His cocky smirk was gone, replaced by something Gabriel had seen 1,000 times before. Fear. Gabriel took a step toward him, his breathing steady. "You picked the wrong man." Raul's fingers twitched toward his waistband, toward the gun he had kept holstered, thinking he wouldn't need it. Gabriel saw the move before it happened. Raul barely managed to draw his weapon before a sharp pain exploded in his hand. Gabriel's knife had found its mark, slicing through flesh and bone. The gun clattered to the ground. Raul screamed, clutching his ruined hand, stumbling backward. He didn't even think. He just ran. Blood dripped from Gabriel's fingers as he watched the gang leader vanish into the night, his cries fading into the distance. He sighed. It was over. For now. Gabriel moved quickly, his footsteps muffled by the damp pavement as he slipped into the darkness of the city. The stench of blood clung to his clothes, the metallic tang sharp in his nostrils. He kept his breathing steady, ignoring the faint tremor in his hands. It had been years since he'd killed a man. The alley behind him was silent now, except for the distant wail of sirens. Someone must have heard the screams. He needed to disappear before curiosity led anyone to the bodies. He took a winding path through the city, ducking through side streets and cutting through abandoned lots. His instincts guided him like they always had, keeping him out of sight, away from trouble. But trouble had already found him. His hands ached, his knuckles raw. His ribs throbbed where one of the thugs had landed a glancing blow. It was nothing serious, nothing compared to what he'd survived before. But it wasn't the pain that troubled him. It was the past clawing its way back to the surface. Gabriel stopped beneath an overpass, his back pressing against the cold concrete. He exhaled, forcing his pulse to slow. He needed to push it down, bury it. But the memories came anyway. Gunfire, screams, a battlefield littered with bodies. He could almost feel the weight of his old rifle in his hands, hear the orders barked through his earpiece, his team moving in perfect formation, the dull thud of a blade sinking into flesh. Gabriel shut his eyes. He had left that life behind, had walked away from the blood, the war, the endless cycle of killing. He had stripped himself of his name, his past, everything that tied him to that world. He had convinced himself he could live in the shadows, unnoticed, unchallenged, but tonight proved otherwise. He had hesitated. He had tried to let them go, to be the man he had spent years shaping himself into. But when the fight came, when the moment demanded it, he had acted without thought, without mercy, and it had felt natural. Gabriel cursed under his breath. He needed to get control of himself before he lost the fragile grip he had on his own humanity. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. A pair of drunk men stumbled along the sidewalk, laughing, oblivious to the blood that had been spilled just blocks away. Gabriel watched them for a moment, their carefree movements foreign to him. He had once been like that, before the war, before he became something else. The sirens faded into the night. The city swallowed the violence like it always did, erasing the traces of another crime in its endless cycle of decay. Gabriel pushed himself off the wall and kept moving. He couldn't stay in one place for too long. He had no home, no safe haven, but he knew how to disappear. Still, A nagging feeling settled in his gut. Raoul had survived. That meant he would come back. Gabriel didn't fear him. Raoul was nothing more than a street rat playing at being a wolf. But men like him didn't let humiliation go unpunished. He would return with more bodies, more weapons, more desperation, and Gabriel would have to kill again. He clenched his jaw. This was exactly what he had tried to escape, but fate, it seemed, wasn't done with him yet. Raoul sat hunched over in a dimly lit room, his injured hand wrapped in a dirty bandage. The pain was unbearable, a relentless throb that pulsed with every heartbeat. But worse than the pain was the humiliation. He had been beaten, outmatched, made to run like a frightened dog by a vagrant. He clenched his jaw, his good hand balling into a fist. The memory of the alley burned in his mind, the way Gabriel had moved, the effortless brutality of his attacks. That wasn't just some homeless man. That was a killer. And Raoul needed to know who the hell he was dealing with. "Find out everything about him," he growled, his voice barely more than a rasp. Two of his men, the only ones left from the disaster in the alley, nodded stiffly. They had seen it too. Gabriel wasn't normal. He wasn't weak. It took them less than a day. The whispers came from old contacts, from people who knew people. No real name, but enough pieces to form a picture. Ex-military, highly trained, dangerous. Raoul's fingers twitched as he listened to the report. Every detail chipped away at his pride. He had attacked someone who had lived in blood and war, someone who had likely killed more men than Raoul had ever ordered dead. That explained everything. But it didn't change a damn thing. He wasn't going to let it go. He couldn't. If word got out that he had been bested, had run from a fight, his reputation would be ruined. No one feared a man who let insults stand. He needed revenge, but this was bigger than him now. Gabriel wasn't just a man. He was a problem, and Raoul knew exactly who to take problems to. The next night, he stood in a lavish club, a world away from the filthy alley where his nightmare had begun. The air was thick with smoke and perfume, the sound of low conversations blending with the bass of the music. At a private table in the corner, surrounded by bodyguards and women who laughed too loudly, sat Santiago. Raoul swallowed his pride and stepped forward. The man barely glanced at him. "You look like hell," he said, swirling the dark liquid in his glass. Raoul forced a smirk. "Had a little run-in. Thought you'd want to know about it." Santiago raised an eyebrow, his expression bored. "Why would I care?" Raoul hesitated. He knew the rules. Santiago didn't waste time on small matters. But this wasn't small. He's not just some guy. He's trained, military or something. Killed my men like it was nothing. That got Santiago's attention. He leaned forward slightly, setting his drink down. "Go on." Raoul exhaled slowly. "I looked into him. No name, but he's dangerous. If he stays on the streets, people are gonna start talking. Maybe he ain't looking for trouble now, but if someone like him decides to come after us..." He let the sentence hang in the air. Santiago studied him for a moment, then leaned back. He tapped a finger against the table, considering. "Alive," he finally said. Raoul frowned. "What?" "Bring him in alive." Santiago's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "If he's as dangerous as you say, I want to know why he's here. And if he's not..." He shrugged. "We'll kill him anyway." Raoul gritted his teeth. He had hoped for a death sentence, but he wasn't stupid enough to argue. Still, as he left the club, he made a silent promise. He would catch Gabriel, but he wouldn't bring him in breathing. Gabriel knew he was being watched. It was subtle at first, a lingering presence at the edge of his vision, footsteps that stopped when he did, shadows that seemed too still. The city was full of eyes, but these were different. These were hunting him. He didn't need to see them to know who they belonged to. Raoul wasn't finished. Gabriel kept his movements careful, deliberate. He changed routes, doubled back, disappeared into crowds when he could. But no matter how many turns he took, no matter how well he blended into the city's filth, the feeling never left him. They weren't trying to kill him, not yet. They were closing in, and he was running out of places to go. By nightfall, he found himself near the industrial district, a wasteland of forgotten buildings and rusted steel, the perfect place to disappear, or the perfect place to die. Gabriel took cover behind a shipping container, pressing his back against the cold metal. The scent of oil and damp concrete filled the air. He listened, breathing, more than one. They were close. His fingers twitched, the weight of unseen violence settling over his shoulders like an old friend. He had wanted to avoid this, had tried to disappear, but some things couldn't be outrun. A footstep crunched on loose gravel. Gabriel turned just as a figure lunged from the darkness. The first attacker swung a crowbar, fast but sloppy. Gabriel sidestepped, catching the man's wrist and twisting sharply. Bone snapped, and the weapon clattered to the ground. No time to waste. He yanked the man forward, using his own momentum to drive him face first into the container. The body slumped, unconscious. Then the gunfire started. Gabriel dropped low, rolling behind cover as bullets ricocheted off the metal. They weren't playing anymore. He counted the shots, the angles, at least 4 of them, maybe more. He reached for the fallen man's pistol, the grip familiar, natural. He didn't hesitate. His first shot found a target. A scream confirmed it. The others kept firing, but they weren't trained. They were just thugs with guns, spraying bullets in panic. Gabriel moved fast, weaving through the shadows, using the rusted remains of machinery as cover. He was a ghost, unseen until it was too late. Another shot. Another body dropped. The last 2 tried to run. One made it, the other didn't. Gabriel stood over the man, his gun aimed steady. "Where's Raul?" The thug whimpered, clutching his wounded leg. He's coming!" Gabriel's jaw tightened. The sound of an engine rumbled in the distance. Headlights flooded the alley. Too late. Raul had brought reinforcements. Gabriel turned and ran, his body screaming in protest from the night's exertion. He vaulted over a fence, landing hard on the other side. More gunfire erupted behind him, bullets biting into the concrete. He didn't stop, couldn't. The warehouse district stretched before him, a maze of abandoned buildings. He knew these kinds of places. They were meant for men like him, places where blood was spilled and bodies disappeared. He could lose them here, but he wouldn't come out unscathed. As he ducked into the shadows, he felt the warmth of blood seeping through his side. He had been hit, not deep, not lethal, but enough to slow him down. And Raul wasn't far behind. Gabriel's breath came in shallow, measured gasps as he pressed a hand against his bleeding side. The wound wasn't deep, but the pain was sharp, radiating with every movement. He had lost the pursuit for now, slipping through the labyrinth of abandoned warehouses. But he wouldn't last long without tending to his injury. He needed a place to rest. And there was only one person who would take him in. Elena. The streets blurred as he moved, his body sluggish from exhaustion and blood loss. He forced himself to stay alert, scanning for signs of Raul's men. The city had eyes, and he couldn't afford to be seen. By the time he reached the small restaurant tucked between 2 crumbling buildings, his vision swayed. The dim light inside flickered, shadows stretching against the grimy walls. He hesitated at the entrance, his fingers brushing against the doorframe. Then he knocked. A pause, then soft footsteps. The door creaked open and Elena's dark eyes widened in alarm. "Gabriel," she whispered, her gaze darting to the blood staining his coat. "What happened?" He exhaled. "Can't stay out here." She hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. "Get in." The warmth of the small kitchen wrapped around him as he staggered inside. The scent of freshly cooked food clashed with the coppery tang of his wound. Elena wasted no time, locking the door and pulling the curtains shut before turning to him with a sharp glare. "Sit." Gabriel obeyed, sinking into a worn-out chair as she retrieved a first aid kit from a cupboard. He watched her hands work swiftly, cutting through the fabric of his shirt, exposing the wound. She sucked in a breath. "You were shot." "Just a scratch." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Hold still." The sting of antiseptic burned through him, but he didn't flinch. He had felt worse, much worse. Elena wrapped the bandage tightly, her fingers careful but firm. As she worked, the silence between them thickened. He could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing against her, the questions she held back. Finally, she sat back, folding her arms. "Are you going to tell me what the hell is going on?" Gabriel stared at the table, his fingers tracing a faded burn mark in the wood. He could lie. Say it was nothing. Say he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Elena wasn't stupid. "You ever wonder why I live the way I do?" he asked instead. His voice was low, tired. She frowned. "Gabriel, I wasn't always like this." His fingers tightened against the wood. "Once, I was the kind of man that men like Raul feared." Her expression shifted, the hardness in her gaze replaced by something softer. "And now?" He exhaled. "Now I'm trying to be something else." Elena studied him for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, she leaned back against the counter. "If you keep running, you'll never stop." He met her gaze. "What choice do I have?" "You could stop running." He let out a bitter chuckle. "And do what? Let them come for me?" She shrugged. "Or you could face it head on." Gabriel's jaw tightened. He had spent years trying to bury the past, to outrun the ghost that haunted him. But tonight had proven that the past wasn't done with him. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done with it either. The night was deceptively quiet. Gabriel sat in the dimly lit restaurant, his back against the wall, watching the flickering candle on the table. Elena had gone to the back, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The pain in his side had dulled to a manageable throb, but the weight in his chest was heavier than ever. Elena's words still echoed in his mind. You could stop running. He had spent years trying to disappear, to become invisible. But the truth was clear now. No matter how much he tried to leave the past behind, it would always find him. And Raul was proof of that. A sudden noise outside snapped him back to reality. Footsteps, too many. Gabriel tensed, his instincts screaming before the first gunshot shattered the silence. Glass exploded as bullets tore through the windows, sending shards flying across the room. The restaurant's door burst open and men flooded inside, guns drawn, eyes wild with adrenaline. Raul's men. Gabriel was already moving. He dove behind the counter just as more shots rang out, splintering wood, knocking over chairs. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and peeked out, at least 6 of them. And Raul wasn't among them. This wasn't just an attack, it was a trap. Another round of bullets hammered into the shelves above him. The restaurant had no back exit. He had to finish this now. Gabriel moved like a shadow, silent and precise. He caught the first man by surprise, yanking him down and slitting his throat before he could make a sound. One down. The others hesitated, scanning the room, their confidence cracking. The beggar they thought they were hunting had turned into a ghost. Gabriel used the moment. He grabbed the fallen man's pistol and fired 2 shots, dropping another attacker before ducking behind cover again. Panic set in. They weren't soldiers. They were thugs. "Where is he?" one of them shouted, his voice laced with fear. Gabriel answered with another gunshot. Another body hit the floor. 3 left, then a scream. Elena. Gabriel's stomach turned to ice. He turned just in time to see one of the remaining men dragging her from the kitchen, his arm locked around her neck, a gun pressed to her temple. "Enough!" the thug barked, his hand shaking. "Come out or she dies!" Gabriel froze. Elena's wide, terrified eyes met his, pleading. He clenched his jaw, gripping the pistol. He could take the shot, but the risk was too high. Then the front door swung open. Raul stepped inside, slow, deliberate, his face still marred by bruises from their last encounter. His eyes gleamed with something close to satisfaction as he took in the scene. "You've been a real pain in my ass," he said, voice dripping with amusement. "But look at you now." Gabriel didn't answer. He was calculating, measuring distances, weighing his options. Raul smirked. "Drop the gun." Gabriel hesitated. "You think I won't kill her?" Raul laughed. "You don't know me very well." Gabriel met Elena's gaze one last time. Then slowly, he let the gun slip from his fingers. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Raul's smirk widened. "Good." Then, with a snap of his fingers, the man holding Elena shoved her to the ground, just as a rifle butt smashed into Gabriel's skull. Darkness swallowed him whole. Pain dragged Gabriel back into consciousness. His head throbbed, a dull, relentless ache pounding against his skull. His arms were heavy, his wrists bound tightly behind the back of a rickety wooden chair. The cold bite of metal dug into his skin. Zip ties, too tight. His legs were tied to the chair's legs, leaving him completely immobilized. A single bulb flickered above him, casting sickly yellow light over the damp, mold-streaked walls. The scent of rust, sweat, and something fouler filled his nostrils. He exhaled slowly. He had been in worse situations. Raul sat a few feet away, arms crossed, a smug grin stretching across his battered face. "You really had me fooled, you know," Raul mused, leaning forward. "I thought you were just some old beggar, some washed-up nobody." He chuckled. "But no, turns out you're something else entirely." Gabriel tested his restraints. No give. Raul noticed and shook his head. "Nah, don't bother. You ain't getting out of those." Gabriel met his gaze, his voice hoarse. "If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead." Raul's smirk widened. "Santiago wants to meet you." That name sent a ripple through Gabriel's mind. He had heard of Santiago. Everyone in the underworld had. The man operated in the shadows, running a criminal empire with ruthless efficiency. If Santiago had taken an interest, it meant Gabriel was more than just a loose end. He was a threat. Raul stood stretching. "I should kill you myself, but orders are orders." He gestured to one of his men. "Keep an eye on him. We move at dawn." With that, he sauntered out of the room, leaving Gabriel alone with the guard. Gabriel watched the thug, a stocky man, jittery, gripping his pistol too tightly. A weak link. He had to act fast. He shifted his weight subtly, wincing as if in pain. "You ever think about how this is gonna go?" he rasped. The thug frowned. "Shut up." Gabriel let out a dry chuckle. "Santiago doesn't keep liabilities. You screw up, you're dead. You let me escape, you're dead. Either way, you don't walk out of this." The man's grip on his pistol twitched. Gabriel continued, his voice calm despite the fire burning in his ribs. "You know what Raul is? A stepping stone. When Santiago's done with him, he'll throw him away. Same as you. But me?" He tilted his head. "I walk out of here and suddenly, you have options." The thug hesitated. Gabriel saw the doubt creep in. Then he struck. He yanked his arms forward with sudden force, ignoring the sting as the zip ties dug into his skin. His momentum sent the chair tipping sideways, crashing into the thug's knees. The man yelped, stumbling. Gabriel didn't give him time to recover. He twisted his wrists, straining against the plastic restraints. The pressure built, skin tearing, then snap. His hands were free. The guard fumbled for his gun, but Gabriel was already moving. He surged forward, slamming his elbow into the man's throat. A strangled gasp, a desperate wheeze, then silence. Gabriel wasted no time. He grabbed the fallen pistol, swiftly dispatching the zip ties around his ankles. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself up. He wasn't done yet. Gabriel moved like a shadow through the decrepit building. He recognized the area, a rundown warehouse in the outskirts of the city. The kind of place where bodies disappeared. He needed weapons, a plan, and most importantly, he needed to make this count. He slipped into a storage room, rummaging through crates. A sawed-off shotgun, a rusted knife, a handful of ammunition. Not much, but enough. His mind worked fast. He couldn't just run. Raul would keep hunting him, and Santiago wouldn't let this slide. This ended tonight. Gabriel found a map pinned to a wall, crude but useful, the layout of the building. He memorized it, then slipped outside. The air was thick with tension. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but they were sloppy, too confident. Gabriel stalked them from the shadows, striking one by one. A snapped neck, a silenced shot. Bodies left where no one would find them until it was too late. The real target was Raul. Gabriel had no interest in Santiago's game. He had spent too long being someone else's weapon. But Raul was personal. He set the trap. The explosion ripped through the night. Fire erupted from the storage area, sending guards into a panic. The distraction was perfect. Gabriel moved through the chaos, unseen, unstoppable. He reached the main office, kicking the door open. Raul barely had time to react. Gabriel's shotgun leveled with his chest. "It's over." Raul's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Wait! Gabriel fired. The blast sent Raul crashing back, blood splattering against the wall. He wasn't dead. Not yet. Gabriel stepped closer, his voice low. This could have ended differently. Raul coughed, blood dripping from his lips. His eyes burned with rage, but there was fear there too. Gabriel didn't hesitate. One final shot. Raul went still. Gabriel exhaled. It was done. But he wasn't safe yet. Santiago would come next, and this time, Gabriel wouldn't be the hunted. The scent of gunpowder and blood lingered in the air. Gabriel stood over Raul's lifeless body, the echoes of gunfire still ringing in his ears. The city outside remained oblivious, its lights flickering against the darkness, unaware that a war had just ended in this forgotten warehouse. Or maybe it had just begun. He reloaded his shotgun with slow precision, his hands steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Raul was dead, but Santiago was still out there. And if Gabriel had learned anything in his years of violence, it was that men like Santiago didn't let things go unanswered. The first sign came sooner than expected. A low, deliberate clapping sound filled the room. Gabriel turned sharply, shotgun raised. Santiago stood at the far end of the warehouse, flanked by two heavily armed men. Unlike Raul, Santiago wasn't the kind of man who needed to posture. His presence alone was enough to demand attention. "Impressive," Santiago said. his voice smooth, almost amused. I was wondering how this would end. Gabriel didn't lower his gun. And Santiago took a slow step forward, his bodyguards remaining still. And I see now that Raul was a fool. I expected as much. He gestured toward the corpse. But you're different. Gabriel didn't respond. He had no interest in Santiago's games. Santiago sighed, as if disappointed. You don't belong in the gutter, Gabriel. You're not a street thug. You're a soldier, a killer. And men like you? He smiled. Men like you don't retire. Gabriel's grip on the shotgun tightened. I did. Santiago chuckled. Did you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're right back where you started. Gabriel's jaw clenched. He had spent years trying to escape, but tonight had proven that violence was the only language men like Raul and Santiago understood. And now, Santiago wanted to recruit him. That wasn't going to happen. You have two choices, Santiago continued, taking another step forward. You can walk out of here as my man, under my protection, or, he spread his arms, you can die here, alone, with nothing. Gabriel's response was immediate. He fired. The blast took out one of Santiago's guards before he could even react. The other dove for cover, returning fire as Gabriel rolled behind a stack of crates. Bullets tore through the air, splintering wood and ricocheting off metal. Santiago remained untouched, watching the fight with an eerie calm. Gabriel moved fast, weaving through the shadows, closing the distance. He took out the second guard with a clean shot to the head. Only Santiago remained. The crime lord sighed, almost disappointed. So predictable. He drew a sleek silver pistol and aimed it at Gabriel. Gabriel dove behind cover as Santiago fired, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Pain flared, but he pushed it aside. He was running out of time. Santiago was good, too good. Gabriel needed an opening. He reached for the last shell in his shotgun and waited. Santiago took slow, measured steps, knowing he had the upper hand. Closer. Gabriel sprang from cover just as Santiago fired again. The bullet missed by inches. Gabriel didn't. The shotgun roared. Santiago staggered back, his pistol slipping from his grasp. Blood spread across his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Gabriel stepped closer, looking down at the man who had tried to own him. Santiago coughed, a dark smile on his lips. You'll never be free, he whispered. Gabriel raised his gun one last time. Then he pulled the trigger. Silence. It was over. Gabriel exhaled, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running. The silence after Santiago's death was deafening. Gabriel stood motionless, his breath steady despite the weight of everything that had just transpired. The warehouse smelled of blood, gunpowder, and burnt metal, the echoes of violence lingering in the dim light. He had won, but there was no victory here. He stepped over Santiago's lifeless body and walked toward the exit. His movements were slow, deliberate. His body reminded him of every wound, every fight, every moment of brutality that had led him to this point. Outside, the city pulsed as if nothing had happened. The distant hum of traffic, neon lights flickering in the smog-heavy sky, people moving through their lives unaware that a war had just ended in the shadows. Gabriel knew better. There was always another war. He made his way through the back alleys, careful to avoid the main streets. He had no illusions. Santiago's death wouldn't go unnoticed. His empire would crumble, and someone would try to take his place. But that was no longer his problem. By the time he reached Elena's restaurant, dawn was creeping over the city. The door was slightly ajar. He hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, the place was a mess. Broken furniture, bullet holes in the walls, shattered glass on the floor. The scent of burnt wood lingered, the aftermath of the previous night's attack. Then he saw her. Elena stood behind the counter, wrapping a bandage around her arm. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You look like hell," she said. Gabriel smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You should see the other guy." She scoffed, shaking her head. "I already did." He leaned against the counter, exhaling. "It's done." Elena studied him for a long moment. "And now what?" Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He had spent so long running, hiding, trying to disappear. But the truth was, the past never truly left. It lingered, waiting for the right moment to drag him back in. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, setting it on the counter. "For you," he said. Elena frowned, picking it up. "What is this?" Gabriel met her gaze. A goodbye? She blinked, her fingers tightening around the paper. You're leaving? He nodded. Elena looked down at the letter, then back at him. Where will you go? Gabriel sighed. Somewhere no one knows my name. She hesitated before asking the question he knew was coming. Will you ever come back? For a moment he considered lying, telling her he might. That one day she'd see him walking through that door again, looking for another meal, another conversation. But he had lied to himself for too long. He shook his head. No. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she unfolded the paper and read the words he had written. It wasn't much, just a simple note. Thank you for reminding me I could be more than a ghost. When she looked up again, he was already gone. Gabriel walked away, disappearing into the early morning haze. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from something. He was walking toward whatever came next. In the end, Gabriel's story isn't just about survival. It's about the choices we make when the past refuses to let go. He spent years running, trying to erase the man he used to be, but fate had other plans. When cornered, he had to decide, stay a ghost, forever hiding, or face his demons and reclaim control of his destiny. What would you have done in his place? Would you keep running, or would you stand and fight? Click the video on the screen to continue your journey of self-discovery and uncover more stories that challenge the way we see the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another story like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.